that podcast. We have an amazing brand marketer to introduce you guys to today. Sara Brooks is the Chief Growth Officer at BetterHelp, the world's largest online therapy platform. In her role, she leads global marketing, growth transformation, international expansion, and member acquisition, scaling the network to serve millions worldwide. With over 18 years of marketing leadership experience, Brooke has a proven track record of scaling consumer tech brands from early stage startups through high-profile IPOs. Prior to joining BetterHelp, she held growth and marketing roles at Meta and The RealReal during their pivotal scaling and public market phases. Known for combining hard performance data and empathetic brand storytelling, she has led landmark initiatives at BetterHelp, including the global Feel Lighter campaign and high-impact partnerships with figures like Lewis Capaldi and collegiate athletes to destigmatize mental health care. Outside of her executive role, she is an active angel investor, startup advisor, and mentor with Mother Ventures. Sara, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's good to meet you.
Yeah, you too. So I know I contextualized your bio a little bit, but maybe we could take it back even further. So where did you grow up? What did you study? And how did you get into the brand marketing and growth world?
Yeah. So I grew up in a small town in Delaware. So never really had an aspiration to be a marketer, but was a really curious kid. So I was one of those kids who always asked why and then asked why again and then why again, right? In the pursuit of the truth and really understanding people, what makes them tick, what gets people motivated, what ultimately helps them to make the purchasing decisions that they do, right? So you can see a through line of those early inquisitive years and consumer psychology that led me ultimately to pursue marketing. I studied international communications and business at American University in DC. So spent a lot of time thinking that I would work for the government. I did work and do some internships in DC and loved it, but ultimately found my way in San Francisco, where I've been for over 20 years, and really found my way into the world of tech. And in tech have sat in partnerships at the intersection of product sales and marketing when I was at Facebook. I actually never was at Meta, but Facebook pretty early.
Oh, got it. So pre-Meta, rebrand, or kind of holding company structure.
Yeah, exactly. And really thinking about sitting at that intersection, like how do you influence consumer behavior? How do you take something that existed offline and how do you take it and make it more accessible, more affordable for people online? And that's really the through line in my career.
I love it. So when did BetterHelp show up on your radar, and what made you decide to join the team, and what's been like so far?
Yeah, so like many people, I had heard about BetterHelp during the COVID years, sitting in my home trying to lead a business at the time, The RealReal, through, a truly monumental time and just really so much change for so many people. So I had heard of BetterHelp at that time, had 2 young kids, was trying again to navigate parenthood, remote schooling. My oldest went to kindergarten during COVID, and had heard of BetterHelp during that time as I was thinking about how to try and balance everything. I had my own coach that I was working with, so didn't use the product at that time, but certainly became aware. Fast forward, started working with the company in 2024. So thinking about again, consumer behavior that used to exist offline, so therapy, and taking that, making it more affordable, more accessible, more convenient. BetterHelp certainly fit that bill. I also love a marketplace. So I find the supply and demand side of things, really thinking about how do you bring those 2 pieces of the marketplace together? How do you solve that from a brand strategy perspective? I find that fascinating, and again, have done that many times over and over. And so was excited to join the team and have a really meaningful impact on millions of people's lives.
I love it. So there were certain business models that basically were either accelerated or completely ushered in because of COVID. You think about video conferencing. I didn't really, do video conferencing as a default until after COVID. Even layers of the e-commerce world were still, a lot of things happened in brick and mortar, and then a huge adoption of e-commerce happened during COVID, or a growth of e-commerce and people shopping for more and more high ticket items that used to be never considered for online commerce, such as cars. Suddenly this idea that, you could do these things online became necessary, and then just kind of part of our day to day. I was in therapy during COVID, marriage therapy. So we were going in office and visiting with our therapist every week, and, having great results, and having a really good experience. And then COVID hit, and, she's like, well, we're going to have to do stuff over Zoom. And I really balked at it. I was like, there's no way this is going to work on Zoom. And, I didn't really have a choice, because that was the circumstance of, where we found ourselves in COVID. And I wanted to continue to get the results that me and my wife were seeing through marriage therapy. And sure enough, the Zoom versions, worked just as well, maybe sometimes even better than when we were in office. So I haven't experienced the product, but I have experienced the idea, so to speak. So how much did you guys already know about how powerful this was, and how much of an unlock was, an opportunity? I hate to call COVID an unlock, but it was really an accelerator for certain types of, things to be delivered online. So just be curious about that timing, and, if you had heard stories, if you joined kind of in the middle or after.
Yeah, so I joined in 2024, so I really can't speak to that time of BetterHelp's business. But more broadly, what I can say is obviously a lot of devastation that happened, and I want to acknowledge that during COVID. Also, from a digital transformation perspective, we did see a massive acceleration of trends that we thought would maybe take, 5 years, that we saw in 5 months, right? So I think there's a lot of examples of that throughout just digital transformation overall. I was at the Real during that time, and we certainly saw, some big accelerants there. And you think about just things that feel very normal to you and I today, right? Sitting and talking on a podcast. So much of the creator economy, is, I think, a remnant of that time. What I will say about online therapy, and how we think about our product is, for a lot of people, it's much more convenient, right? It's also more private. So thinking about if you're in a rural location, for example, and there's 1 or 2 therapists in your town, rather than having to sit in the waiting room and maybe see a lot of people from your town, you're doing therapy from the privacy of your own home. And again, we're advocates for therapy writ large, right? Not saying that one is better than the other, but certainly a lot of benefits to an online therapy solution.
Let's talk a little bit about the supply side. So, famously, marketplaces have given different types of labor, outputs of labor, an opportunity to fill gaps, right? So it's the chauffeur that's driving Uber, at the beginning. It's, people who own homes and they want to, not there through. Can you tell me a little about the supply side? Why do therapists love BetterHelp? How do you find them, and how do you make their lives better and easier, as well as your consumers?
Yeah, absolutely. So our therapists are very qualified, licensed professionals. So people who have been practicing in their field for some time. We have a very high standard for who we accept onto our platform, making sure that they have all of the requisite licensing credentials, the right case studies, the right education, and so on. And so we're really, really proud of the quality that we have on our platform. And that's really important for driving real clinical outcomes. So what you see is that most people on BetterHelp would recommend their therapist to a friend. That is definitely the highest accolade that you could have for someone that you trust with your mental health. And again, we make sure that quality stays high so that we drive the outcomes that people are looking for in therapy. Our therapists come from a variety of backgrounds, right? So some people may have their own private practice and also operate on BetterHelp. Some people may have a full-time job that they love and then also like working on BetterHelp just to augment and be more flexible. Some people may work exclusively on our online platform. I can tell you when I meet therapists and speak to them, some of my favorite stories are people who love our platform because our members sign up really wanting to do the work. They are self-seeking therapy. They know that this is something that they want to engage in and really looking for those outcomes. And so for a therapist, that is a great challenge. Being able to work with lots of different types of people, again, to that diversity that we have from a client as well as a therapist perspective, really matching those two people together. We call that our therapist match commitment, and one of the things that we're really proud of on our platform.
You talked about the idea of demystifying mental health and working with a therapist. A lot of times people think about therapy as something to do when there's a problem, right? But you also alluded to the idea that you were working with a coach before COVID and you had never experienced the product because you're actually working with a coach. So can you talk about the idea of therapy as more of something that you do like you would do going to the gym or going to the doctor that, isn't a mental health professional, somebody that you go in for, a monthly checkup or a quarterly checkup. Can you talk about the idea of mental health as a practice ongoing and doesn't necessarily need to be an intervention?
Important to state that I'm not a clinician, so I
Yeah,
won't talk
of
about
course.
treatment plans. But
Yeah.
from a marketing perspective, I will say that one of the most important things we can do is demystify therapy and also normalize therapy, right? So not only for times that you're in crisis, but part of an ongoing approach to your mental health, right? So we work with a number of content creators, podcast hosts, and others to help amplify that message to really normalize therapy. And what we find over and over again, you and I both just spoke about having been in therapy. Therapy was part of my life growing up as well. That still is not the norm to talk very openly about therapy. And what we find in our State of Stigma report, which we've run for 2 years consecutively now, is that collectively people say seeking mental health support is a good thing. So 86% of people say yes, that's a good thing. But when it comes down to actually seeking support themselves, 73% of people say society gets in the way. So there's still this gap between collectively, what do we agree is true, and individually, what action will we take? So that's really where we think about building trust, building clinical credibility, and showing up in culture in a way that helps to change people's mind and open the door that therapy could be a good solution for them.
I love that. You just talked about the idea of working with creators and podcasters. I'm very familiar with your guys' ads because I see them everywhere. But they are served up in the context of watching podcasts on my big screen TV, on YouTube connected TV. And it is very, UGC. It's, podcast host doing a host read that I imagine you guys then ask for permission to clip that down and then use that as an ad. You see it as actual host reads inside of a lot of your favorite shows, both big and small. So you guys have obviously taken a very specific lean-in strategy on, working with creators, working with influencers, and working with podcasters. Why did you think that was the most productive path to go down, not only from a media perspective and getting in front of those trusted audiences of those creators, but also from the perspective of how you're going to show up in a paid environment across the rest of the open web in which people are experiencing the brand?
Yeah, so it all comes back to the brand strategy, right? So, who's your product for, right? Who could benefit from this? What is stopping them, in this case, what's stopping them from seeking therapy? And how are you really going to not only garner attention, but change people's behavior, right? And so as I think about therapy, which is a deeply personal thing, thinking about real authentic stories on when therapy has helped, right? So when we're talking about podcast hosts or creators, authenticity is everything, right? Because we want to make sure that this is really true to whoever the content creator or podcast host is, right? That they do see benefit in therapy, that they themselves have personally benefited from it or know someone who has. And then that allows us to tell real stories on the human connection, what has occurred for them, what has transformed for them. And again, really important that we come back to the brand strategy on who's the work for and what do we want to say to them. Of course, we do that in our own way in brand, doing some more traditional advertising with producing our own television commercials and things of this nature, and also working with the right creators. So building that relationship over time so that we make sure that it's a real authentic relationship, not only between BetterHelp and the content creator, but ultimately with the creator and their audience.
I wanted to step in briefly to your background as an angel investor. When did you start looking at early stage companies to invest in, become a startup advisor, and then your larger work as a mentor with Mother Ventures?
Yeah. So, when I worked at Facebook, I worked on the partnerships team and taught a lot of different companies how to grow using Facebook. And so I got to work with companies of all sizes, some very large who were undergoing digital transformations, and some very small companies. And so by virtue of that work, I met lots of different startup a lot of people in the startup ecosystem. During that time, never invested since I was working with those companies at Facebook, but following my time there, started doing more mentoring, more advising, and also writing some checks, doing a few angel investments. With Mother Ventures, I'm a limited partner in the fund there and get to work with a lot of the portfolio companies to hear what's top of mind for them, how are they thinking about growth, and potentially helping to unlock places where they've been roadblocks. So I really enjoy it. I love the early stages where you're just trying to figure out, who is this for? How do we think about really solving a real problem and then taking it and scaling it?
So fun. All right, let's talk about, growth teams often are getting addicted to hyper quantified metrics like CAC and ROAS. How are you balancing performance analytics with brand storytelling and kind of looking at the top and the bottom of the funnel?
Yeah. So again, coming back to your fundamentals, who's the work for? How you're trying to reach them? So coming back to who's the audience, right? Maybe there's a particular audience that you haven't quite broken through with yet, and so you want to make sure that you're working with more top of funnel to try to make them aware and start to change behavior, right? So one example for us would be our Mind Over Madness campaign. Much more brand driven, right? So we worked with Joakim Noah this year, who was University of Florida, former NBA player, and really used basketball and the assist as a metaphor for therapy. So in that case, breaking it down, who's the audience? Well, this is for men, right? There's a lot of women who like basketball too, and we sponsor the NBA, but in this case, for men. And so thinking about who's that audience? Are we lifting awareness with this audience? Are we changing perception with this particular audience? What's that looking like? What's the cultural moment? Well, we're using assist as a metaphor for therapy. Is that really easy for us to parse? Does the audience get that? What's the sentiment? So really starting to measure each of those. And then, as you mentioned, we use all of that branded content in a way that can also be generative at the bottom of the funnel. Right. So thinking about how do you use those assets? Again, the long form may be, more in interest of garnering awareness and great favorability and sentiment and so on, but you can absolutely cut that down and make it a DR asset as well, right? So how do you think about creating content that can serve all the way through the funnel with the right metrics? And then, of course, partnering with data science on incrementality and halo effect and all of the great things that we know brand drives.
When you're working inside of health, there are some limitations on the data side that some brands get to leverage around HIPAA, regulation, healthcare, advertising and marketing, and the industry. Are there things that you guys have to keep in mind to be in compliance with those, or are there things that you guys just don't do out of your own personal brand ethos, and you could but you don't because you don't feel good about it?
Yeah, highly regulated category, right? And so very sensitive. We do not take any personal identifiable information. We never share that back with any advertising platform. And again, take privacy very seriously. This is your health, right? And so our consumers trust us with that data, and we take that extremely seriously. That said, there's still a lot of audience insights, aggregated data, things that you can use to still be a sharp marketer, right? So you don't need to, make a particular interest group on Facebook to reach this person, right? Like you can come up with what's resonant creative for an audience that you think your product is for in a way that's going to, ultimately garner their attention while still being in a very sensitive and highly regulated category.
BetterHelp's global Feel Lighter initiative addresses findings that Gen Z report high anxiety, yet still those stigmas that you were talking as far as personal culture getting in the way of them taking action on that. How did you design the campaign to break through without feeling preachy?
Yeah, it's a fine line, right? So I think we want to make sure that we are, again, thinking about what's the insight for this audience that we're trying to reach. What's the thing that they're scared to say? Not just, hey, I'm stressed or I'm anxious, but why are they stressed? Why are they anxious? And then how can we really produce a campaign that shows what the outcome can be when you work with BetterHelp, when you work with a therapist. So doing that in a way, understanding that each person's journey to therapy is incredibly different and happens in their own time, happens in their own way. And so that's how we approach this with Feel Lighter. Again, using people in a variety of scenarios. My favorite execution of this, very dark in terms of the feel of this campaign. It's wintertime when we release this. It's dark. You just feel cold watching this particular spot, right? But there's a person on a bus, and you can just feel how lonely she is feeling, right? It's the music, it's the lighting, it's all of these things. And then one by one, the lights just start coming on. And truly, when you're in therapy and you're in the spot where, again, you're depressed, you're not sure the way out, like one by one, you do feel these lights sort of start to come on for you, these little aha moments when you're doing the work. And so I thought that was a really good example. Again, just more metaphors and not saying like, this is the way you have to do it, but really just trying to tap into what's that human emotion. And then again, selling the outcome. What's the way that you might feel after you've taken the leap into therapy or restarted therapy.
It's interesting you mentioned, the darkness and kind of the tone of that creative. It got me thinking about, the idea of seasonal depression, certain parts of the country, and now for you guys, the world, in which the environment can lead to anxiety and depression. Whether it's weather, rain. And then there's also factors like the holidays that people report sometimes being more depressed or stressed because of the lack of connection or having to go deal with a connection, right? Are there kind of moments that from kind of the marketing calendar, for a lack of a better word, or the way that the larger macro effect of the world kind of, acts on people with the seasons and things like that? Are there signals that happen on a yearly marketing calendar that would cause you guys to heavy up because the need is greater?
Yeah, I would say, look, it come back to the audience and what's the insight. We really think a lot for our brand about being the catalyst. So the catalyst for conversations, for human connection, for people to take the first step or return back to therapy. I also talk a lot about being culturally relevant and also rooted in clinical expertise, right? So thinking about what are the moments throughout the year, what are those cultural events. The holidays is a great one, right? How can you really support people during the holidays, a time that can be, wrought with emotions and, high times of stress and trying to juggle it all, or maybe it's, the connection with your family. How can we show up in ways that are for the community that we have earned the right to be in, right? And how do we say it to them in a way where they know that we're part of that community and we're here really to support, right? So rather than being opportunistic or taking advantage of, how people are feeling, really being there in the spirit of support is how we try to show up in all of our marketing.
I love that. You talked about the nuances and cultural relevance. Now that you have expanded internationally to over 20 different countries, stigma can wildly vary across different countries and cultures. Has there been an insight as you've expanded into these different countries that have, something that maybe you weren't as familiar with a particular culture that shocked you, you found interesting, and changed the way that you approach marketing in that country?
Yeah, absolutely. So just last year, we expanded in 5 countries internationally with local providers in the local language. And, we really first sought to understand what's the need in this market, right? So, of course, a lot of market research. Let's understand what are the nuances, culturally speaking, about therapy. Maybe people are more used to going to family and friends versus seeking professional help. What's the stigma look like? How does stigma show up for different generations, different genders, and so on? And so really a lot of deep understanding of the market before entering, because it is very nuanced from place to place, from person to person. We also ran the State of Stigma report this year in all of those markets and found some very big differences in each of those, as well as in all of our user interviews. I would say that from a marketing perspective, we really think about having a global operation. So, getting the benefits of a centralized team, of all of the insights, of all of the performance by channel, and all of the things that we can keep centralized and global, while also having a hyper-local approach from the team on the ground. And we lovingly call them our souls on the soil. So people who truly understand the market, right? In addition to all the market research that we do, in addition to these reports that we run, so that we can, again, show up in a way that feels very inclusive and understanding of the culture that we're entering.
You played key roles in 2 high-profile tech IPOs before joining BetterHelp. Were there core scaling playbooks from Meta and the luxury resale translate? Were there playbooks from Meta and the luxury resale space that translated directly to telehealth? What were the biggest learnings from each that you were able to bring into your current role?
Yeah, definitely. So when I was at Facebook, as I mentioned, I worked on the partnerships team, and we learned a lot from our internal growth team who was in charge of growing Facebook. One of the key things that I learned while at Facebook was really thinking about a learning system. So how do you establish a learning system such that you're not just looking at one campaign or one creative or one channel in isolation, but you're rather thinking about how does all of this play together. You mentioned earlier performance marketers who tend to get, really focused in on what they can measure and sort of these KPIs. I think that false attribution and this false sense of like, I can measure every single thing really gets you in trouble. And so at Facebook, again, that learning system, how do you think about how it all comes down and works together? The other thing that I learned while there was really thinking about how do you get a member that you're acquiring to value as soon as possible? And how do you understand what value looks like? So Facebook's very famous for, get someone to make X number of friends in Y number of days. And that was sort of the aha moment for Facebook, right? And for the growth and the long-term value to that particular user. That is true in every business, right? Every business has, beyond just acquiring a member and getting them to try your product, like what's an aha moment for them, right? So making sure that whatever company I go, or if I'm advising a new angel investment, or I'm advising a startup, really thinking about what is that value that you drive? How do you try to organize not only your product towards that? Obviously the product, that's their key job to do, but what about in your marketing, right? So making sure that those things are really connected, and again, takes you back to sort of that learning system, that constant pursuit of tuning that machine. At the Real, which was the luxury consignment company, what I would say there I learned is the importance of pattern recognition, right? So how do you take things that were applicable at my time at Facebook in a gaming vertical or an entertainment vertical? How do you take that to shopping, or in this case, to another marketplace? How do you learn as quickly as possible, whether it's an audience, whether it's a creative, just knowing when to recognize those patterns and when to maybe make an earlier call on something beyond when the experiment data would be totally ready. Like, how do you get that intuition and that pattern recognition over time? So I would say those are some of the key learnings from both of those experiences.
Very cool. Having managed teams up to 200 people with massive marketing budgets, how do you foster an agile test and learn culture where team members are empowered to make mistakes without fear?
Yeah, I really put a lot of trust in my teams. And I do this because I set the context for my team to be able to make a decision when I'm not in the room, and clear guardrails on what decisions should you be making on your own. And if we fail, that's okay. We're going to take the learning and we're going to change it for the next time. And which decisions are more considered, do we need more data for, do we need to be more thoughtful about how we actually approach this decision, and when you might need to solicit my help. So really having a lot of trust in your team with clear guardrails is a recipe for agile decision making, for your team taking risks, and also teaching themselves those same lessons that I just said I learned, right? Like the pattern recognition, being able to connect the dots on things that maybe aren't their project, but they're listening to their colleague talk about, that will inspire new thinking from them, that will inspire new campaign ideas, where I don't hear all of those conversations. I can't always connect those dots for them. So again, a lot of trust in your team. When things go wrong, we really go through, well, what happened first? What happened next? And not in a way that is meant to blame or finger point, but in the interest of learning, so that we can raise the bar for the next time.
All right, we made it to the end of the show and we're just addressing AI. You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
I'd like to talk about the product significance of AI. Looking ahead over the next 3 to 5 years, how do you think AI, conversational technology, and shifting consumer behaviors, being willing to talk to an AI about something as personal as mental health, and the fact that you guys have this massive opportunity for training, I wonder where you sit in the idea of using AI as either a supplement or a way to fill in the times in between, a lower cost. Can conversational AI or AI therapy have a place in the BetterHelp future of how you guys interact with consumers and potentially support them during the moments in which they maybe can't access a therapist?
Yeah, so I can't speculate on what will happen on AI in the next 5 years or 3 to
Mhm.
5 years, right? I think it's really anyone's guess, and obviously technology is accelerating so quickly,
Mhm.
more rapidly, than anything we've ever experienced. What I will say about the role that AI plays in therapy today, and at BetterHelp, we are absolutely using AI to help therapists, to conduct their jobs so that they can focus on care, right? And so
Mm.
how do we think about a lot of the administrative burden that sits on therapists? How do we think about actually using AI in our marketing in ways that ultimately help therapists get more caseload? So AI is certainly playing a role, quite a bit in how we think about, how we're evolving our product over time. How it interacts and how people actually pursue therapy, I can't speculate on that today. But again, what I can say is that we're really focused on making that human connection, and what we call our therapist match commitment, because we know the number one thing that drives therapeutic outcomes is the relationship and the trust that's between a therapist and their client.
Well, very exciting, Sarah. It's a brave new world, and you guys are on the bleeding edge. So I'm excited to follow along and continue to see how you grow the platform and help serve more people in the world. So if folks want to follow along with your thought leadership and/or learn more about connecting with a therapist at BetterHelp, where do you want to send people to stay in touch?
Yeah, people can follow me on LinkedIn. Sarah E. Brooks is my LinkedIn handle. And of course, follow us, BetterHelp on LinkedIn. That's where we share most of our updates. And thanks
All
so much for
right.
having me today. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much as well. All right, everybody. If this is the first time you're seeing the show, don't forget to give us a follow or a subscribe. If you're listening, an honest review on whatever podcast platform you might be listening on is how we find a larger audience organically. So don't forget to do that. And if there's somebody out there who you think would enjoy the conversation that I had with Sarah today, maybe a marketer that wants to learn how to hyperscale a dual-sided marketplace in an important area like mental health, or maybe an entrepreneur who might learn from some of the stories that she's had in amazing roles inside of Facebook and the Real, or maybe somebody who just wants to investigate mental health themselves and just needs a nudge in the right direction, don't forget to share the show. And with that, I will see you all again.